welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be working on a Jeep Patriot, I do believe. Yeah, Patriot. The customer says it needs a front wheel bearing, so we're going to go ahead and raise it up and start taking the tire off. The first thing we're going to do is make sure the wheel bearing's bad. You just grab it with it off the ground and then you shake it, and there's play in it, so it could be a ball joint or tie rod end also, but it goes all the way around evenly, so most likely that is the wheel bearing. First thing we're going to do after that is go ahead and take lug nuts off. It's a 19 millimeter. All right, the rim's actually stuck to the hub, so I'm gonna put a lug nut on it. Then I'm gonna go back on the back side and tap it with a hammer. This axle nut is extremely rusted, so I'm gonna get my needle scaler and try to break some of this rust up. Hopefully I can get a socket on that. So here's the needle scaler. It's got steel rods in it basically, and you pull the trigger and these go in and out. They're hardened, so I'm gonna try to stay away from the threads because it'll probably mess the threads up. I'm just gonna try to tap around the nut and hopefully it gets all rust off. I got it cleaned up and I beat a 32 millimeter socket onto it. The 32 millimeter slipped on it. As you can see, it's kind of rounded now. It's not a good sign. I found a 30 millimeter. It's 12 point though. I don't really want to use that, but that's all I got. Very little play. So before I try it, I'm actually going to heat it up with a little propane torch. Now I'm going to try using an air hammer and hitting the nut. Hopefully it'll shock it loose, but this thing is not coming off. Well, that got it. Be sure not to touch it because it's going to be hot. Hopefully I have an extra nut somewhere. Now you gotta try to break that axle free. Best way I found to do that, you use the pointing attachment for the air hammer, put it right in the center of the axle. There's normally a little indent, and then you just try to hit it out. Okay, it pushed right out. Nice. As soon as all that rust, you'd have to beat it out, but that's a good thing. All right, we gotta remove the brake caliper. It is a 14 millimeter. Make sure to tie your caliper up. I'm just using some mechanic wire. You don't want to let the caliper hang on the hose. You cause the hose to go bad. I just always wrap around the coil spring, if it has one. In this case it does. Just let it hang like that, make sure there's no tension on your hose. Now remove the two caliper bracket bolts. Those are 18 millimeter. I don't have a regular impact socket, so I'm using my swivel. Remove the rotor. Now you gotta unbolt it from the strut assembly. There's two bolts here. There's a bolt down here. It's a pinch bolt on your lower ball joint. And then your tie rod end, which is over on this side. I'm gonna go ahead and do a tie rod end so this way I can move it freely. The tie rod end's a 18 millimeter also. Well, good news is I didn't have to beat it out. Bad news is it's just spinning. So now I'm about to get a wrench, turn the nut, and also hold the stem or the bolt for the tie rod end. I don't know if you guys can see that, but see how the whole thing's spinning? If I was down on the ground, I could put a jack underneath it and it would probably put enough pressure on it to spin it the rest of the way off, but it's on a lift and I don't feel like lowering it down. So the top of this ball joint is a 9 millimeter. We're just gonna hold it and then back it off. Still currently spinning. The nut is flush with the stud, so now I have to hold it with vice grips on the shaft down here in order to get the rest of the way off. It's pretty loose, but it's not loose enough yet. All right, now I'm able to move the spindle nice and freely. There's an ABS wire going into the wheel bearing. That's what reads your wheel speed sensor, or it is a wheel speed sensor. It's what reads your wheel speed. So I'm gonna go ahead and remove that so I don't break it. The wheel speed sensor is a 10 millimeter. You have one clip up here on top of the spindle. All right, here's the wheel speed sensor. It's kind of stuck. So off to the side of it, there's a little, I'm gonna call it an ear. That's where your bolt goes and holds it in. What I'm gonna do is pry up on that, try to get the wheel speed sensor to start twisting. All right, I think the sensor's going up breaking if I keep trying it. So what I'm gonna do is I'll put the bolt back in it, then I'll go up top and unplug it. I'll just keep it in there. Have to fight with it the whole time, but better than it breaking and costing more money. Before I lower it down, we'll go ahead and break the strut bolts loose. There's two of them. Those are gonna be a 21 millimeter. What I like to do is put the nut back on the bolts, run it on, get a little ways, and then I'll take a hammer and hit this side to break them free out of the spindle. Normally don't take much, just a couple taps. I'm gonna leave one in it for now, but here's what the bolts looks like. There's a spline little section of this, so when it goes into the bottom of the strut, it actually gets sucked in and don't spin. So that's why you gotta beat them free. The last bolt is gonna be the lower ball joint. The nut side is a 18 millimeter, and the bolt side is a 19 millimeter. I'm gonna do the same thing with this as I did the bolts for the strut. Put the nut on it. And then give it a couple little taps. The way this ball joint's set up is it actually pinches around the ball joint. So if you take something and beat it into the seam of it, I guess, the slit, then it should make this expand around the ball joint and it'll be easier to pry up. Alright, how I did that was I pried here to get it to start coming out. I took a big pry bar, put back here in the sole, and I pried the lower control arm down away from the spindle. So, the only thing left now is this one bolt holding it in, which is loose. So I have to go up top and unplug the little speed sensor. As you see, it goes this way, up, around, and it goes up in the engine bay. So we gotta go up there and find that. The plug for the driver's side is kind of a pain to get to. It's right where the tip of my finger is, right beside that leaf. It looks like there's a red tab you pull out, then you press the side of the connector and it should release. But I might have to remove this air box to get down there, which is kind of ridiculous. Alright, I did have to remove the air box. There was this bracket on top, went from here to the top of the air box to here. It says do not disconnect the computer. I don't see why it would hurt, but whatever, I'll listen to it. So I had to take that bracket off. Then you have a bunch of 8mm bolts holding the top lid to the air box, or a Phillips screwdriver. Then you flip that out of the way. Then you disconnect your intake tube, flat screwdriver on this clamp, pry it away from the air box, and then the air box just snaps in with these little finger things, I don't know what they're called, down these rubber grommets. So you just kind of pop it up, and then you have a hose for your ventilation system. Then down here you can see I already unplugged it. I moved that red tab back, then you pinch right there. I had to use some needle nose pliers to reach down in there, but then you want to make sure there's no clips holding it, which there's not. You can see the hose right there. So now we should be able to go underneath, pop that rubber grommet out, and pull the wire out. Here's the rubber grommet. Should be able to just pull it, maybe. Actually feels like it's plastic on this side. There we go. Okay, it is plastic, I lied to you. Then just pull it until your connector comes through. There's a clip right here. There's a bolt here, and then this bolt here. Both these bolts are 13mm. I should be able to take this bolt up here out for the strut, slide it out, push the axle out. Alright, so it's giving me a little bit of trouble right now, but you want to make sure you don't pull on the axle, because you can either separate it or pull it out of your transmission. Alright, this bearing's the actual press-in bearing. I'm gonna say it's pretty bad. There's play in it right now. So you gotta go press the hub assembly out. So this right here comes out. Then you press the bearing out that way, most of the time. So we're gonna go ahead and I gotta go to work, use their press. So I'll see you there. Alright, I'm back. I just already did a quick time lapse putting it in. The lighting and stuff's not very good at my work, so I didn't really want to have to talk and explain stuff. But first I pressed this out, the centerpiece, which is the hub assembly, where your wheel bolts to. Then on this side, there was a big C-clamp underneath this. I think it's called C-clamp. There really wasn't no ears like a C-clamp. They were weird, but I had to keep hitting it with a punch to break it loose, and then I grabbed some big snap ring pliers and pressed it, got underneath those pliers and pulled it up out. It was kind of a pain. Then I pressed the bearing out, it goes down. I took the sensor out there. I didn't want to break it, but I pressed the bearing out, and then on the hub assembly, part of the bearing was still stuck on there. I was able to press it to the end, then I couldn't find anything to put it, to hold it and press it the rest of the way out. My bearing separator was actually bending. So what I did was I cut it with a torch and got it loose, and then tapped it off with a hammer. And then I pressed the bearing in, put the C-clamp back in. Make sure you dig out the ring where the C-clamp goes. And then put the hub back in, pressed it, and now we're here. So there's a sensor, that's what it looks like. First thing I'm gonna do is, when I set it up here, I'm gonna have to slide the axle into the hub, and then I'll get started in the strut, get a bolt started, so this way it don't fall. Alright, got the lower ball joint, the bolt started and tightened. Now when you do the upper strut, this one don't have much play, but some of these is how you adjust the caster and camber on cars. So you got to make sure you put it back where it was. Normally there's like a rust line or something, you ain't really got to mark it. So I'm gonna grab my impact gun, kind of hold it to where it looks like it should be. And you should be able to just tighten the nut side up and it should suck the splines back in and not turn. Alright, go ahead and do a tie rod in. And most likely you'll have to either put a jack on this, put pressure on it, or hold the top with a socket or a wrench again. Now I'm gonna put the wheel speed sensor in. I'm gonna put a little bit of grease on it so this way, if somebody has to change it, or me, down the road, it'll come out a lot easier. Don't put too much on there, just enough to have a nice coating. Maybe it'll prevent the rust from sticking to it. Okay, go ahead and reroute your wire. It's always important to me to put the wire back how it was. I don't like wires just dangling around, and it looks a lot professional, more professional. I'm gonna reinstall the brake rotor, caliper bracket, there the bolt started, so now I'll go ahead and put the caliper on. Now you don't have to take the caliper off the bracket if you don't want to, but might as well check the pins and stuff while you're this far. And these pins actually look good, there's grease on them, so we'll go ahead and reinsert them. Alright, you want to be sure that your dust shield ain't going to rub anywhere. Make sure you didn't bend it. It all looks good. Now I'm gonna see if I have another axle nut. I have a couple of them, so that one's pretty shot. If I don't, then go ahead and put that back in. Unfortunately, I didn't find a new one, but the old one tightened up just fine. So I'm gonna go ahead and remove my wire from the strut that I almost forgot about, and then put the tire back on it. Might cause some weird noises. Go ahead and wiggle your tire, make sure there's nothing else loose. Spin it, make sure your dust shield's not rubbing. Go ahead and air the tires up and check the other wheel, make sure there's nothing else loose. Alright, got all that put back together and the wire plugged in. Well, opposite order what I just said. So we're all good down here. So I checked the air pressure and it brings me to something I should probably tell you guys. Turns out a lot of people do not know this. So these back ones have 44 PSI in them. That front one 40 and that one 35. You always go by the sticker. So you can't read it, but it says 32 PSI front and back, and then spare 60. Do not go by what the tire says. Most of the little cars and SUVs, they all say 44 max PSI. That is what you do not go over. That's what the tire is rated for. Your car, on the other hand, is not rated for that. You can do it, but it's gonna be a very stiff ride, and you might as well just go by what it says and recommends. Now the only thing left to do is test drive it, make sure there's no noises, and make sure the ABS light is off. the ABS light is on, then most likely it's something to do with that sensor. Check your connection, make sure you didn't break it anywhere. That pretty much wraps up this video. If you guys liked it or learned anything, go ahead and leave me a thumbs up. If you got any questions, leave me a comment and I'll try to get back to them as soon as possible. If you want to see more how-to videos, make sure you hit that subscribe button. Catch you guys next time.